Hey, really quickly before we move on, we got one call left, and then we'll jump into super chats. Ben, you're a doctor, right?
Yeah, which is still weird to me. That is reality.
Do you believe in an eternal soul?
No.
Cool. Well, there you go. To the person in the chat, John, who said that it's hard to find a doctor who doesn't believe in an eternal soul. You found one. Congratulations. There it is.
Me, I am
also,
that. Yep.
I wanted to point out also that a minute ago when I was inviting people to call in, I threw out sex and gender being binary. These are things that I talk about quite a bit, but I realized I spoke for you in that moment. I don't think you and I have ever had a conversation about that. Are you of the camp that sex is not a strict binary, or are you of the camp that it is a strict binary? How do you think?
I'm in the camp that it is not a strict binary.
Cool. When then you are on the same call, or in the same camp. Yep. That brings us to Charles, pronouns he, him in New York, who will be our last call for the night, is an agnostic atheist who says that sex is a binary and there are no exceptions. That's what it says here on the call screen. Charles, you're on the line. Yes. How are you doing?
Hello. Am I coming through nice and clear?
Yep. Yes, you are. So you've got hello. You've got a biologist and a medical doctor here who would love to hear your argument, because not all biologists and not all medical doctors agree with this. This is kind of a contentious area right now, but you have two people here who are of the opinion that this is definitely absolutely not a binary, no matter how you slice it, at least as far as I can tell. So what exactly would you like to bring to the table? Like, what do you want to talk about?
Sure. This is exactly the reason why I'm calling to speak with a couple of experts on it, and to
don't call me an expert.
Maybe show my point of view on it. So in regards to sexual reproduction, we'll focus only on the Homo sapien species, human beings.
Sure.
And with regards to that, I think sex has a very limited context. Like it shouldn't be used as fallacy of composition to then use that against a person as a whole human being. So in this discussion, I only seek to talk about the topic and not really how the topic could be used against someone.
Okay.
So the whole reason why I'm calling is I'm confused about why scientists are confused about this. It seems to me that sex is an overarching parenthetical principle with relation to the human species.
Yeah, let me ask real quick. What is your understanding? What is your understanding of the definition of sex? What defines somebody's sex? Yeah.
Okay. So for sex, I've placed the definition as the initial, inherent, and intended developmental pathways that a human being must go through to produce a fertile gamete that is used in human sexual reproduction.
So is the gamete the most important part here, or are you claiming a certain part of this pathway is more important than other parts of the pathway? Or I guess you even said pathways, multiple.
Correct. So I believe that
I would agree with that.
Simply a single. I don't believe it's reliant on any certain singular state. I believe it deals with both the path and the state at the same time. So, for example, someone who was born, goes through puberty, develops a fertile gamete, meets another person of the opposite sex, has sex with them, bears a child, and gives birth.
So I guess my question here is
100% fertility. Sure.
Yeah. So here's my question though. Okay. So are you aware that there are lots of people that can produce gametes that don't have other characteristics aligning with that particular sex?
Of course. Yes, I do.
Okay. So in that case, which factor is what you label their sex as?
So this is why I think this is more of like a deterministic argument rather than a causal one. I think from the principle that affects everyone individually, that a certain outcome of an individual does not necessarily show an exception to the principle itself.
Well, here's the problem though, because I have a different definition for what sex is, because I don't think that there can be one key factor that assigns you to a sex category. Whereas in order to follow your definition, at some point you are going to have to make the decision to assign the person to a sex category, whether it be genetic sex, anatomical sex, gametes, or hormones. You're going to have to, at some point, draw the line and say this person fits one of these two categories. And a lot of people draw that line at gametes, but then, okay, if you have somebody, which there are case studies, which I have and can cite, I can send these papers of case studies of somebody who is an XY female and had a baby who was also an XY female. They only found that out because the daughter, who was an XY female, was amenorrheic. They went back, karyotyped both the daughter and the mother, found out that they're both XY. So, but for all intents and purposes, those both would have been labeled as female for their entire lives. The mother produced fertile gametes, had a child with no other intervention, like no IVF, like no other, it was a spontaneous pregnancy. So in that case, like at some point, if you're going to say that there are two sex categories, you have to at some point draw the line of, is that mother from that case study, like does their genetic sex matter more than their gametes? Or like, I don't necessarily accept that, because I would say that sex is a combination of all of the above characteristics, because you have differences in your genetic sex versus your anatomical versus your hormonal versus your gametes, and they all can be different. So I would say that it's a combination, and therefore you cannot assign like people in general to one of two categories. They're going to be a mix of the above in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's really the long and short of it. By the way, I got a big smile on my face because I know the exact study you're talking about with that Sawyer syndrome case. So freaking cool. And that really is what it boils down. That's really what it boils down to me there, Charles, is that like people like to pretend, and I think what Ben is hammering at here is that you have to pin down sex to something, or it seems like you're trying to. But the fact of the matter is, sex is not a simple switch in one direction or the other. It's a multivariate system with lots of different factors that go into it. Not a single one of those factors is solely determinate of the outcome of the system. And not a single one of those factors has only two options. So how can you slice that up to call it a binary? Like, where are you putting that peg to say this is the thing that you either are this or that? Like, where are you putting that?
Oh, okay. That's a really good question. And actually, I don't disagree with you or Ben in any of your explanation through that. I have looked up, the condition that you've mentioned before, and the Swyer syndrome, someone who is chromosomally through their karyotype XY. So the expectation is that they would develop male, but instead developed fully functional, fertile female parts and has been able to carry a child. With that being said, would you not say that they have carried out the female role in sexual reproduction?
Sure, but that's an arbitrary box that we defined and labeled. Yeah, it's a role. It's not a thing. So it's just a box that we drew. And that box is fuzzy and has strange areas, or strange edges. You know what I mean?
So and again here, why is that fuzzy? But again here too, you are in that example. You are pinning down the role as the determinant for what makes somebody one or the other. Like you've set a standard. So by that, if you're saying that the role of female in reproduction is what matters, then you are assigning these people to female based on gamete. So you are saying in that gametes are the determining factor, are you not?
I would say that would be like proof positive, principle fulfilled, that would be an example of that. Well, that's the only contingent way that humans can reproduce, right? Is there any other
so then if somebody
where
can't,
that has not been the case?
So then if somebody can't fulfill either role, then are they just not a person?
Or do they not have a sex?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So that right there is where I'm going to say, like, science, for us, we still have limited understanding of that. But does that mean that there wasn't a reason or a disruption in that principle to begin with? So I would say, like, let's say someone just decides not to have kids ever or not reproduce. Does that without a doubt, negate their sex?
That's not what I'm starting. If somebody does not produce gametes, does that negate their sex? That is what I'm saying here.
Wouldn't that be more of an indication that there was a disruption that stopped them from producing gametes?
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
It does not matter.
If you're defined whether or not, however they got there, whether they were born without whether they were born without ovaries or testes or gonads. That's the word I was looking for. Fuck, I could not come up with that. Whether they were born without gonads or whether they lost their gonads later on down the line, however it happened, if you're boiling sex down to gametes and the ability to reproduce in a particular way, if you don't have that ability, do you not have a sex?
Well, I didn't necessarily boil it just down to gametes. I boiled it down to
that's what we're trying to hammer out.
Lead to that. And then there's not just a single one. Many people, all the time, who all create gametes have followed a singular path, but at the same time fallen within some parameters to that principle.
So again, though, let me bring up our other case study. So we had a person that was chromosomally XY that fulfilled a female role in reproduction, had fertile gametes, and you said that person carried out the role of a female, so that would make them female. So you pin that down. Are you backtracking on that, or are you saying that there's a different factor that you're going to lean on to assign them? What factor assigns them to a sex?
Well, it was more so of like that would be like the most evidentiary case, right? So I agree with you. It doesn't matter necessarily the conditions to which someone is unable to fulfill their sexual function. That doesn't necessarily negate the fact that the principle is there.
That has nothing to do with what he just asked. Like, I'm sorry, that's not an answer to the question. It's a complete dodge. To say, but the sex is still a thing.
Could you ask it again? So, like, I'm trying my best to directly answer it, but
yes. So with the person that was XY, that had fertile gametes and reproduced, fulfilled a female role in reproduction. To that statement, you had said that because the person fulfilled the female role and had those gametes, that they would be classified as female. So are you sticking to that statement, or are you backtracking and saying, no, it's not the gamete that assigns them, there's a different factor at play? If so, what factor is at play that would then assign them?
Oh, okay. Well, in which case I would still agree. I would still stand by that.
So it is just the gametes then. That's all that matters, is what you're saying.
So if somebody does not produce gametes, what sex are they?
Indeterminate.
Okay, so that's not within the binary, right? That's not one of your two boxes.
Male, female, or indeterminate.
Well, indeterminate just means it has a value, but we have just no way of determining it.
Or it's a value that is not within one of the two categories that you mentioned.
You're saying that if I were to cut off my testicle, just to be clear, you're saying that if I were to cut off my testicles right now, you would no longer be able to tell that I was a male. You would have no way of assessing that. It would be completely indeterminate because I no longer produce gametes.
Oh, well, no. That's not what I'm saying. Is that like the?
So then, what if I was born without them? What if there was an issue when I was developing and I didn't develop testes, but I still looked exactly like this? Would you be able to tell that I was a male?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? You broke up a little bit.
So what if I was born without the testes? What if there was something went wrong in my development and I am still XY and I still look exactly like this and I still I have a penis and I still produce facial hair and all sorts of secondary sex characteristics, but I don't have any gametes. I don't have any testes. Would you be able to know that I was a male, and if so, how?
I would be able to suggest with a high level of confidence, but not be entirely sure.
Okay, but this is
so. Like, what factors allow? So what factors allowed you to guess? Because isn't sex based on gametes, like you just said? Well, so you're basing your assumption based on something that's not gametes. So are you saying
that's
that
what I'm
other
saying.
variables?
It's a
So are
collective.
you saying other variables matter now?
That's exactly what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So the answer to that question is that the principle is the binary part. You know, so the outcome of the individual, right, is based on all other factors as well. So something can be sex related or very closely sexually proximal, right? So just the fact that you have a penis but just can't create gametes for that does not necessarily mean that there's no principalistic binary.
So let's
let
take
me
a
ask you this
person
way.
that's more ambiguous. Let's take a
Is there
person
a
that's more
third
ambiguous. If we have a person who has complete well, okay, we'll make it even more ambiguous than where I was going to go. You have a person, they have testes, but the testes are inside fully developed labia, and you have multiple internal structures. You have both your mesonephric structures and your paramesonephric structures. So you have both an intact male system and an intact female system.
Okay.
What sex is that person?
By the way,
I mean, it
he's
would
not
be-
making that up. That's a thing that can happen.
That's a thing that can happen. Yep.
Yes.
It's hermaphroditism, right? Is that what we're talking about?
We don't use that
So,
term for humans really because it's kind of degrading. But
Okay.
essentially the concept, yes.
you could use the word intersex for this, but intersex is a blanket term for a variety of conditions.
Okay,
So how would
I'm
you
sorry
assign
if
that person?
Oh no, I don't.
So how would you?
You don't have to
yeah.
apologize. We understand you didn't mean that. We're just explaining.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, but how would you assign that person to a sex?
How would I assign that?
Yeah, what
that
sex
would
are
be
they?
a frame. Does a frame of reference actually matter in this regard? Like what does it matter what I think that they are?
Because you
you're
made the
one
claim that
with
it's
the
binary.
claim. You're the one with the claim here that it's a binary. So we're asking you how you determine
Correct.
in this bizarre, seemingly non-binary case, how do you fit this person into a binary?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So I would say that you cannot, with any certainty, show that they are either sex.
Okay, but in your call screen here, it says sex is binary. There are no exceptions. So here's a person that you can't determine what sex they are. Are you saying that there is a sex, we just have no way of knowing it, but you're pretty sure that that sex falls into a binary?
Yes. Okay, so is there some factor?
If you don't know what it is, sorry, forgive me. Yeah. If you don't know what their sex is and you have no way of determining it, how are you then going to follow that up and say, but I know it's this, it's one of these two. I don't know what it is, and I have no way of knowing what it is, but it's definitely one of these two. How are you making that leap?
Okay. Because of the fact that, is there a third and unique reproductive system by means
that's
that
such a stupid argument. We're not claiming that there's a third system. There's male, female, and neither. Yeah. And that's kind of what we're saying here. That is a third category. It does not fit either of the other two. You do not need a third sex to have a third category that is not A or B. Right? This is such a horrible argument.
It's just intersex. Well, it's just somewhere we're talking about two human sexes with a continuum of variation between them. That's what we're talking about here. So we're saying you could be this, or you could be this, or you can fall somewhere along this fuzzy gradient. And even though that fuzzy gradient might have just a very, very few amount of people, only a few million people at any given time fall into that, maybe a few tens of millions of people, those are still people. And we can't just gloss over irregularities in the data in order to justify sticking to only two categories.
Okay. Well, can I put it in the form of an analogy?
Go for it.
If you want, but I don't know how it's going to help.
Okay. So if you have, I have two. So if you play a game of heads or tails and the coin fails to resolve, right? Does that make it heads, tails, or sides?
Yeah. If you flip a coin and it lands perfectly on its side, you don't get to say
neither heads or tails.
Well, it's probably actually either heads or tails. We just don't know. Like this is now a third option. And that's the thing that like I think Ben and I are really trying to get across to you is simply that more than two isn't two. So sperm, egg, or neither isn't two options. It's three. If we talk about chromosomes, XX or XY or XXY or X nothing or XY but still female phenotype or XX but still male phenotype, like that's not
or
two options. That's not a binary.
XX.
Or like you can have so many fucking X's.
So many chromosomes.
Like, that's the thing. Like there's as I said a little while ago, I was pretty succinct about it, and you agreed, is that sex is a multivariate system without a single solely determinate factor and without a single factor that has only two options. So how can you look at something that has more than two options and say, yeah, but there's only two options?
Well, when I said that sex is binary, I meant that it's binary in principle. So if I have a blue sock,
right? Okay, so yeah. So your principle stands if
you can choose that, right?
If you ignore all the people that don't fit your definition, sure, your definition stands. But like, you're just ignoring the people that don't fit your definition.
But they do though.
All sandwiches are either peanut butter and jelly or ham. If I exclude all sandwiches that are not peanut butter and jelly or ham, right?
That's a true statement, though. That's true. And that's the thing, is like we talk about the cases. You know, you talk about the number of cases out there. Like one example that I like to point out is that, and this is true. This is a true science fact. Over 99.9% of all atoms in the universe are either hydrogen or helium. Does that mean that the periodic table is a binary and that carbon and oxygen and nitrogen are actually just hydrogen or helium? We just can't determine which because they have all these extra protons and shit. Like, does that make any sense to say?
Oh, it's just a messed up hydrogen that you added an extra proton.
It's hydrogen that has an extra 7 protons and a fucking neutrons, and that's why we call it oxygen. Yeah. Like, no, that's it. Just there's more than two options, right?
Well, yes, there's more than two outcomes, correct?
Right. Yeah. So how can you call something with more than two outcomes and more than two systems to get to those outcomes and more than two modalities to get to those more than two outcomes? How can you call that a binary? How can you call something with more than two options a binary?
Because it's binary by which it is able to be expressed through a spectrum. So if I have,
basically,
like, for example,
it's a binary. If you overly simplify it down to just ignore the nuance of the problem, then you get a binary. Well, I don't know if you know this, but like science exists beyond like what you're taught in like 5th grade. Like there's more to that. Like we teach something at like earlier stages of science, but there's a lot of things that we overly simplify, and we know that they're wrong because you don't understand enough yet to go up to these higher levels. Like, and again, like our model of the atom that we teach you in high school is wrong. Like a lot of science that you learn in high school is wrong. And like, you can't take that and stick to it and say that all these advanced levels of biology are wrong because your simplified model is what makes sense to you. Like, I'm sorry, but that was dumbed down for you. Like, you can't accept basic biology at the expense of advanced biology. Like we're at advanced biology right now. You're going to have to go with us to this level.
Especially what you just said a second ago. You actually said the words that it's binary. It's expressed as a binary through the spectrum. What does that mean? Like, Charles, like, can you see the screen right now? Are you looking at your computer screen?
It's a little delayed, but I was gonna make an example of it. Like, if you have chocolate and vanilla, you can make a cone with any composition of part chocolate, part vanilla, and its outcome is unique and expressed within an infinite amount of ways based on what flavors you choose to put on that cone. That doesn't negate the fact that there were 2 flavors to begin with that made all of those options.
Except
how
there's
many
also
colors are on my
strawberry
screen?
and
Right. How many colors are on my screen right now, Charles? Where it shows my face there, I put a color here. How many colors are there?
I'm not exactly sure how many seconds I'm behind because you two are looking at the screen right now, not saying anything.
Oh, flip. Okay. Well, we'll give it 5 seconds, and if it doesn't pop up for you, I'll explain.
I see it now.
There you go. How many colors are there?
An infinite amount, I would say, presumably.
No, it's binary. There's blue up here, and there's red down here. Don't you see? This is a strict binary. Does that make sense?
Well, it's made from 2 different colors, yes. It's
right.
And
so
in
like
between
that's
is different levels of intensity.
So what I'm asking you is, does it make sense to call this a binary? Because there's red here, definitely, and there's blue here, definitely. And just because there's a bunch of space in here in the middle where there's a totally different range of, like you said, infinite color gradation here, does it make sense to call this a strict binary?
But we're far from the fact of the things that composed of this possibility.
That was a yes or no question.
You know what I'm saying?
That was a yes or no question. Does this look like a binary to you? Could I call this a binary and have it make sense?
Yes.
How?
Because it's made from 2 different colors distinctly on the sides, and then the mixture of them in different degrees create a variability in outcome, which is down to
which
2 colors
Charles, is purple red or blue?
That's exactly what I was about to. That's exactly what I wanted to.
Is purple red or blue?
It depends on how much. It depends on how much.
Right in the middle,
and how much
right smack in the middle. Equal amounts of red and blue. Which is it? It has to be either red or blue.
50%.
Isn't purple's definition a combination of both, which is 2?
That's what we're saying.
So is it red? It red or blue? If you're calling it a binary, what blows my fucking mind into pieces, Charles, is that when I showed you that binary in the first place, you were like, "Yeah, that's an infinite amount of colors." And then when you had to make it make sense for your dogma, you immediately went to, no, actually, it's a binary. I was wrong in the beginning. It was actually a binary because there's 2 colors on the ends. And now we're talking about, well, what about purple? That's red and blue mixed together. Like, yeah, it's 2 things. That means it's binary. It's both at the same time. That means it's actually one or the other. What? What is that?
I'm confused by that.
So am I. What you just said.
We're talking about 2 different points of the sequence here. If we take 2 elements,
took your exact analogy. We took your exact analogy.
I think it might be about time to start thinking about moving on, because I believe what Charles is doing right now is not really a debate tactic, but it's an argument tactic where you're so dug in and unable to admit you're wrong, you actually start behaving like a stupid person, as though there's no way you can see it, because he's literally special pleading. Either he has no idea what a binary is, despite defending that something is a binary, or he is pretending he is too stupid to understand that many things that are spectrums have 2 sides to them, that you can have a 2-sided spectrum. That's why I tried to just pull up just the most obvious, easy one was color. But like, that's the thing, dude, is like, yeah, there's things that are dipolar that have, two ends and fuzzy wiggle room in the middle. And at no point could you possibly say, no, it's actually just the 2 ends that exist in matter. Like that, you wouldn't do that with anything else, except for when you tried to just now with colors. Like, I'm sorry, I don't want to sound rude, but like, if you can look at that color spectrum and say that's only 2 colors,
I don't know what to say to you beyond that.
He either fundamentally doesn't know what a spectrum is, or he's playing stupid because he doesn't want to cede how exposed he is as a fraudulent thinker in this call. So, Charles.
Well, hold on a second. Why do you think that is a fraudulent thought? Well, I am agreeing with you that it is a spectrum, which is an outcome, but the cause that made that spectrum is binary.
Which made no. Shut up go look up stop engaging him, because he's repeating. You've already explained this to him 9 different ways, and at this point he is weaponizing his ignorance and basically making you guys do stuff and dance around that he's refusing to get the point. He just asked the same question he's had responded to 9 times after having the audacity to offer the two of you to go, hey, maybe I need to give the two of you metaphors and analogies, which is something that teachers do to students so they can grasp it. This person calls in to talk to a doctor and a scientist and goes, well, maybe you two are too stupid. So let me actually use the example of a coin flip that actually debunks my own point, because you two aren't actually grasping this so well. Charles, just go look up the definition of a fucking binary and call in when you haven't decided. When I get backed into a corner and am shown I'm wrong, I'll just pretend to be an idiot. Or don't call in if you're just an idiot. Thank you, Charles. We need to move on. Good night.
All right.
I also just can't do much longer. I'm not feeling well, and this was.
No, I understand. I was thinking about the same thing, as we've all got places to be. Really quick before we move on, I just want to really quickly see here. This will take 2 seconds. Sorry, there we go.
I learned that phrase, weaponizing your ignorance, from Luxander, and I've used it a lot ever since.
Oh, it's great.
That's literally what was happening that time. Like, oh, well, my special pled definition that I'm just fucking making up on the spot. Something is a binary if it has 2 extremes on the end. So let's say you have 10 options, Ben, okay? Let's say there are 10 options, okay? But aren't all of the options between the number 1 and the number 10? All of the options.
Therefore, there's only 2 options.
So when you have 10 options and all the options fall between option 1 and option 10, 1 and 10, Ben, count with me. 1 and 10 is how many? How many numbers is 1 and 10? Come on, Ben. Say it.
It's so frustrating.
There's 2. There's 2.
So Ben just admitted 10 options is a binary.
I want to really quickly before we move on. I always like to do it whenever we get to this point in the show where people talk about how, like, oh, biology just isn't keeping up with my burgeoning intellect and all these things. This is an undergraduate biology textbook. And I bring out an undergraduate textbook because I like the people who say it's basic biology. This is actually basic biology right here. And you can read along with us. The biochemical, physiological, and anatomical features associated with males and females are turning out to be more complex than previously realized, with many genes involved in their development. We now know that sex is not a binary state with just 2 defined outcomes. Because of the complexity of the genes and proteins involved in sex determination, many variations exist. Some individuals are born with intermediate sex or intersexual characteristics, or even with anatomical features that do not match an individual's sense of their own gender, known as transgender individuals. We wouldn't know anything about them. Sex determination is an active area. Right? Sex determination is an active area of research that should yield a more sophisticated understanding in years to come. Again, that is an actual biology textbook used by biologists to train new biologists. So, like, I'm sorry, if you're going to sit here and say that, the science isn't caught up because we're able to say, hey, there's actually more information than we thought. That's how science works. That's the history of science over the past several generations has been, this turned out to be more complicated than we thought. Here's this thing that flies in the face of what we thought was true and simple, and now we got to learn more shit. And for the past however many 100 years, we've been saying, yeah, sex is a binary. And then we learned new things. And now we're adjusting our understanding. And if you can't do that, we had the call just a minute ago with Pip, I believe, where they were talking about, atheists with a dogmatic understanding of things. So like where they're talking about, I forgot how they phrased it, but like, this religious sort of way of holding on to bad ideas. This is one of them. The amount of self-proclaimed skeptics, the amount of atheists, especially, and people in the atheist community who are going to, excoriate trans and intersex people or people who talk about sex as non-binary as being, some sort of woke, pseudoscientific, whatever. All of a sudden, modern biology, modern anthropology, modern genetics, modern psychology, all of a sudden, these are all not real science anymore. Like, I had a dude freaking tell me earlier that psychology isn't a real science. It's like, I'm sorry, I can't have a fucking conversation with you if you're going to sit here and say, no, I take science very seriously, just not the stuff that's in peer-reviewed journals within the past 10 years. That's bullshit. It's like, it's not good enough. Or when we talk about, oh, well, here's the fucking dictionary definition of this stuff. They're like, oh yeah, well, my dictionary didn't say that in the 1950s. Right. That's how it works. Congratulations. At one point, we thought that we didn't know what vaccines were, and then we learned what they were, and that thing changed. Like, it's so frustrating. Anyway, we'll bring out.
You sound like a blue hair communist liberal cop.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Stopped working into that. Also, one of the things that's interesting with these people who think they're so smart is that they also don't even realize that even things we have considered hard binaries have turned out to not be binary, like computer binary. I talked about this with a person recently who's a computer programmer and talking about, that one that indicates something is on. Turns out some things can be more on than other ons. So like you can have, if you could line up 8 light bulbs and represent binary that way, and you'll notice some light bulbs are brighter than others. And they actually, with computer binary, have this problem because you can have higher power state ones that end up bleeding over and changing the data designations of other bits of code. Literally like gay code is what I'm describing. And that's not the mathematical term. And then also the fact that anytime you're talking about something like this, like he tried to win with the coin analogy, but true binaries do not exist when you're talking about two separate, distinct options like heads or tails. A real binary is X and not X.
Yeah.
Not heads. It would be heads and not heads. That would be a true binary because then the side and tails would both be not heads. So male and female, the only way to make a sexual binary would be to say male and not male. And
everything else.
Every other option has to be in that one, which is kind of like what happened with that theist caller that you had on the first one. Where you tried to put a million options into a single option of all other options equal one.